Good evening, everyone. Our group members include Amy Shiroma, Kanoa Haake, Malia Espinda, and Misty Bartolotti. Tonight we'd like to present a case study in leadership on Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is a prime example of a truly inspiring leader. His innovative, courageous, and imaginative passion move us into a technology era that has changed the course of our lives forever. In this presentation, we will examine the influences of time, culture, and world change on Steve Jobs' business approach and his accomplishments. We'll look into his motivations, his leadership style, and vision, and evaluate his successes as well as the obstacles he faced. In our present day, we're dependent and reliant upon technology for our business and personal life. Leaders like Steve Jobs were influenced by our societal history to create what we enjoy today. In fact, many of you are probably using his technology right now. Let's go to the blackboard and take a poll. If you are using an Apple product at this moment, select yes or no. If you're not using an Apple product, yet you own one or two, please vote now, whether it's an iPod, an iPad, an iPhone, or a Mac. A for 0, B for 1, C for 2, or D for 4 or more. We will discuss those results later. Right now I'd like to take a look at some highlights of the contextual landscape that was pertinent to Steve Jobs. The 1960s. They brought an increase of intrigue in the world for technology and what could do to enhance the productivity of the businesses and economics. In the 1960s, we saw the introduction of microchips in electronics. Integrated circuit boards replaced transistors, the first ATM was introduced by Chemical Bank, and the first man walks on the moon. The world believes that our boundaries are endless, and this creates a surge forward for more. The 1970s. The impact of the Vietnam War on the citizens of the country spurred a move for freedom, independence, and a free spirit for the innovative and the creative. We wanted change, and we wanted to be the initiators of that change. The 1970s moved us into a greater realization of the power that technology would have on our lives. Computer technology is commercialized and no longer seen as just a need for infrastructure, but it's seen as a commodity. In this decade, we began to see the development of technological advancements that created smaller, more effective, and efficient machines for us to use. Components like fiber optic wires and UPC barcodes are introduced, along with biotechnology. The computer giant companies like Commodore, Xerox, and IBM were foundational players in the development of the personal computer, bringing technology into our homes and efficiency into our offices. Technology comes even closer to home with the color TV and electronic gaming such as Pong and Atari. In the 1980s, we saw a boom in hardware and software for computers and electronic technology. The rocket to the moon in the 60s has become the fully equipped space shuttle, allowing man to spend weeks in space and explore the galaxy. Computers become the bridge to a new generation. With access to information and processes through PCs, we develop into a me generation that is focused on independence and innovation. Information technology skyrockets and makes the world so much smaller and accessible. The 1990s to present. In the 1990s, technology begins to fully integrate into our personal lives. We have fully bridged the gap between nations. The world is connected 24 hours a day through the introduction of the World Wide Web. The internet changes the course of history forever, and with the information at our fingertips, life increases to hyperspeed. As we move into our present time, we're completely dependent upon technology. Business is conducted on e-channels, interactive media, and as our source of entertainment, social media, and personal devices become our news source and mode of conversation. Old technologies like the landline and the snail mail even traditional banking have forever changed. Steve Jobs' timeline influencers. Steve Jobs was born in 1955. At this time, the country was on the cusp of technological change. The impressionable years of his childhood and young adult life were greatly influenced by the driving need for innovative improvements in our technology and our dependence on it. Living in Silicon Valley, California, Jobs was surrounded by engineers and electronic technicians that spurred his interest to analyze, design, and build electronic equipment. Jobs lived in an era of new concepts, ideas, and products geared towards the pursuit of enhancing the function and efficiency of technology. There was a growing global competition for new and enhanced technology in the areas of telecommunications, computer hardware, and software, and manufacturer efficiencies. There was an ever-growing societal shift to embrace technology for personal use. Jobs was in the right place at the right time. With the tremendous drive for opportunity, Jobs and his company changed the pace and face of technology for our world. If we look at the timeline of his accomplishments, we can see the impact that he and Apple have made on our society. In 1971, you can see he befriends Steve Wozniak. 1985, you can see he leaves Apple. In 1996, you can see he returns to Apple as CEO. Now, Apple's unique business model encompassed all components, including hardware, software, and innovative devices that had made them a pioneer in their time. We will next look at what motivated Steve Jobs and evaluate the unique leadership and style and approach that made him so famous. So much of one's life is formulated in the experiences of youth. Those experiences define, mold, or expose a person to situations and responses that take root in character and personality. For Steve Jobs, the reality of his adoption created a sense of indignation that craved justice. To provide comfort, Jobs' adopted parents reinforced how special and loved he was. Still, he was disappointed and challenged, and now buoyed by the self-confidence instilled by his adopted parents to ensure his biological parents understood the mistakes that had been made in abandoning him. After being dismissed as a problem child from his first elementary school, Steve connected with his new fourth-grade teacher, who helped him ignite a passion for learning. That passion led to an interest in electronics, and at 10 years old, Steve went to NASA, where Steve was exposed to the concept of a computer. Later, Jobs was also severely bullied in middle school, and he pushed his parents to change his school until they relented and moved to a different neighborhood. His new neighborhood was filled with engineers and technicians. This is where he struck up the key friendship with Steve Wozniak, whom Jobs met in a garage of a mutual friend while taking apart circuit boards. This passion for computers would foray into the inclusion into the Homebrew Computer Club in 1975. By 1976, Steve and Woz had produced the first Apple, and Steve persuaded a homebrew friend to purchase a large order of the Apple I's. Impressively, within 1 year after that, Steve then persuaded another millionaire friend to incorporate Apple. These were the foundational building blocks that taught Steve Jobs about his own skillful powers of persuasion. To convince people about things he strongly believed in, he knew he had both the vision and the confidence in his capacity. There is noted one rather surprising influence in Steve Jobs' life, LSD. It's said that one of the most profound experiences in his life was taking LSD. He has said that the psychedelic journey he went on made him think different and reinforced a sense of focus and understanding about the importance of making a mark in history and in the human consciousness. Steve was also highly influenced by the teachings of Zen Buddhism. He believed that it was important to avoid attachment to material objects, which could be one of the great ironies of his lifetime achievement of selling a worldwide product. There were 3 points that were drawn up when the company was incorporated in 1977 that remained in place beyond his death: empathy, impute, and focus. As Jobs told Isaacson in his biography, the young man who helped craft the Apple business plan said to Jobs, "You should never start a company with the goal of getting rich. Your goal should be making something you believe in and making a company that will last." And so the Apple marketing philosophy was born. Empathy. Intimate connection with the feeling of the customer. Understand the customer better than anyone else. Number 2, focus. In order to do a good job of those things that you decide to do, eliminate all the unimportant opportunities. Forget about everything else. And number 3, impute. People form an opinion about a company or product based on the signals it conveys. Make sure every little thing you do serves number 1, always and everywhere. Present in a creative, professional manner and impute the desired qualities. As Steve matured, so did these catchphrases, all of which applied to the same basic 3 philosophies: great product over profit, Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, creating insanely great experiences, and selling dreams, not products. What was Steve's approach to business? Jobs' approach to business was ultimately rooted in humanity. He wanted great products, not profits, that moved humans to places of consciousness they could not yet even imagine themselves. He saw himself as an enlightened Jedi who wanted to make the world a better place. So how did Steve Jobs manage? Well, this slide shows it all. My company, my way. Perhaps with his masterful powers of persuasion and his arsenal of skills, Steve Jobs is said to have created what is now affectionately called his reality distortion field. Through lies and manipulation, Steve made people believe they could accomplish what seemed impossible. He made people buy into his vision through whatever means necessary. He imposed his passion for perfection and sought out true artists for his company. What tolerance he had was for A players only. Steve was famously impatient, petulant, and tough on his employees. In this vein, Steve felt the need to avoid the bozo explosion, in which managers are so polite that mediocre people feel comfortable sticking around. Steve was honest. He was harsh, rude, abrasive, and demanding to his staff. He felt that it was okay to be honest and just tell people right to their face if they were not doing a good job. But somehow, in between Jobs' rudeness and roughness, it came full circle, as is his vision, and passion provided inspiration to those he was so hard on. Apple's top players stuck around and more loyal than the other companies, even those run by kinder and gentler CEOs. A more detailed look at Steve Jobs' management characteristics allow us to paint a more focused picture of the kind of manager that Steve was. Individual versus collective, he was individual. He possessed vision, meticulous planning, a natural leader, and took charge. He questioned assumptions, interpreted data according to his beliefs, and not pre-established rules or categories defined by others. Without regard to rules, Jobs acted on his own defined ideals and values. Positive versus confrontation, he was confrontation. He regularly evaluated employee task progress. Terror-inspiring taskmaster who was forever screaming and randomly firing workers. Current performance versus long-term development. Long-term development with Steve. Jobs' strategic leadership was rooted in his ability to anticipate and envision the future, maintain flexibility and think strategically, and initiate changes that gave Apple its enduring competitive advantage. Directive versus autonomy. It was directive. He promoted the need for efficiency with low regard for employees. He set goals based on his preferences. Employees often worked extended hours to achieve his goals. Steve Jobs' style complements task by think different. Steve Jobs created a company that was definitely not a traditional corporate structure and was rooted with innovation and creativity. Jobs' value and philosophy was to think different, and that meant acting different and creating different results. In this way, he could not manage the company or its employees working in the status quo with traditional management techniques. He needed to stretch the boundary and be a pirate. He once said, "Why join the Navy when you can be a pirate?" His style was definitely complemented the task that he and his company set out to achieve. Apple could have not created and effectively marketed such unique products such as the iPad and iMac and iTunes without committing to these principles. Number 1, hire the best, only the best. Find and recruit the A+ players. Number 2, focus. Focus on products and not profits. The profits will come with the best products. Number 3, simplicity. Keep it simple. Jobs was the ultimate end user and always had the consumer in mind when he designed the products and services. Number 4, have intuition and foresight. Always stay ahead of the game. What will the consumer want next? Trust your gut. Number 5, relentless requirement for perfection. It was not just a pursuit of perfection, but a requirement that kept Apple successful. Did Steve Jobs need to adjust his style? While Steve Jobs was known to be a tyrant, it is just this type of style that drove the success of the team. He kept his decision-making efficient and impersonal on purpose. His decisions were not about the quality or value of the person, but rather solely and completely focused on the quality and value of the person's work. If the work fit the value of the company, and it was to a level of perfection that he expected, then it was great. If it wasn't, then it sucked, and that was end of discussion. Jobs kept the organization flat, without many layers of management on purpose. He and his executive team were directly involved in their respective areas. This kept the entire organization focused on the objective of the company. Jobs himself involved himself in all areas. While his communication may not have been the best and caused some issues with misunderstood ideas or directives, his purpose never wavered from providing the best product for the market and the consumer. Steve Jobs had a charismatic and transformational style of leadership. He kept his team believing that the impossible was entirely possible. He was a motivational speaker, and he was able to transform his vision into reality and motivate his team to transcend their personal interests for the good of the organization. He drove his team hard, and when they made errors or produced substandard work, they experienced the wrath of Steve Jobs. But when they did well, he treated them like a genius. It was just this style of leadership that kept his team driving for the impossibilities, and in turn created insanely loyal teams. How did Steve Jobs contribute to developing his organization and cultural style? Apple's a culture of innovation, style, and functionality, with the intent to make technology enhance the lives of everyday people. Steve Jobs instilled the creativity, discipline, and drive for Apple, Next, and Apple again, and an excellent motivator. Jobs convinced everyone, his company, that they were going to change the world, especially in Apple's early years. His mantra was used to motivate and captivate the employees in newly emerging fields of computers and microprocessors. When Jobs left Apple, the morale plummeted, and the culture of creativity and the promise of changing the world was replaced with the preoccupied management and groups. Subcultures and politics pervaded the work arena at Apple. It was during this time, and creativity was stifled, the products produced did not appeal to the masses as they did before. Return on equity fell from 40% to 13% over 6 years and was negative in the years that followed. Upon his return, Jobs infused the passion that had made Apple of the 80s an innovative, groundbreaking company that sat at the forefront of the information age. The iconoclastic Jobs brought in a world-class supply chain expert, Tim Cook, to cut perks, cut waste, and increase productivity. Innovation followed as Apple's current employees bought into everything you can do to change the world. The employees didn't seem to mind the lack of amenities. Jobs was quoted in March 7, 2008, Fortune magazine article, "My job is not to be easy on people. My job is to make them better." And how did the vision differentiate Jobs from others? As a charismatic and authentic leader, Jobs was able to motivate Apple employees to heights of creativity and innovation. Jim Collins, the author of Great by Choice, categorizes Steve Jobs as a 10-timer, or someone who shows extraordinary levels of ambition, a level 5, fantastic discipline, empirical creativity, and productive paranoia. 10-timers come from companies that outperform their market by an average of 10 times. Level 5 ambition is the ability to impart his vision into others. Others bought into his ideas and values. That would provide the framework for Apple to create some of the most innovative products that would truly change the world. Fantastic discipline is adherence to your set of goals and values, no matter if you're outperforming or underperforming. It is the ability to see the long term as opposed to the short term. Empirical creativity is ability to see what other people do not base sound empirical evidence. Jobs realized that microprocessors were important before anyone else did, and realized that it would lead to technological innovations in the future. Productive paranoia defines the core of Steve Jobs. He did not sit on the success of the iPod, iPhone, or iTunes. He was continually looking for new challenges for himself and his company. Never satisfied, his drive to create and improve to better our world is what drove him to exceed expectations in all aspects of Apple. John Sculley, Apple's CEO during Jobs' absence, could be categorized as a transactional leader. A transactional leader is focused on the short-term success, and it's more concerned with tasks and roles as a means to increase productivity. Jobs enticed Sculley from Pepsi in order to garner a bigger market share from IBM. Sculley began by reorganizing Apple into departments and divisions. He replaced creativity with competition between the departments and focused on short-term gains instead of long-term objectives. When Apple was the most profitable under Sculley, he took time off instead of looking for the next challenge. How did Jobs seek to retain the innovation and spirit of Apple in a rapidly growing and changing environment? You've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards towards the technology, not the other way around. Steve Jobs looked to impart his vision on the world and sold it to the people that could help him accomplish them. He made innovation a priority at Apple. To launch a successful Think Different campaign, Steve Jobs commissioned The Crazy Ones, a video that featured Einstein, Edison, Gandhi, Muhammad Ali, Hitchcock, Richard Branson, and other troublemakers who changed the world. Dave Power. Every employee understood the CEO's views on risk-taking and innovation. Jobs would personally select and recruit the top executives, engineers, and designers. His authentic leadership and charisma would entice these individuals to follow him. Jobs stressed creativity and the promise of changing the world at Apple. Never one to rest on his latest accomplishments, Jobs challenged his employees to constantly strive for perfection and the next big thing. The belief that they are changing the world, along with Jobs' ability to deliver on the promise, became a self-fulfilling prophecy to foster innovation in all of the different markets that Apple came into. What enabled Jobs' potential growth to his business so quickly or successfully? Along with his uncanny ability to see the potential of technology long before anyone else could, Jobs learned from his failures and unwittingly prescribed to Jim Collins' 20-mile march. The term 20-mile march comes from a race to the South Pole between Amundsen and Scott. Amundsen's arrive at the South Pole while Scott's expedition has perished. Amundsen would only travel 20 miles per day no matter what the weather. Scott would travel 100 miles if the weather was good. This was the difference between surviving and not. Steve Jobs, great leadership. Jobs would work with technologies that Apple controlled and make them perfect to eventually gain industry dominance. These were strategic moves from using the profits from the iMacs to pay for the research and development of the iPod, which in turn led to iTunes. Each step Apple made under Jobs was sequential and deliberate. They never overextended themselves because they were always a potential for failure. All of these steps that eventually led to life as we know it today were done in a manner that allowed it to progress without putting the company at risk. With that said, was Steve Jobs a great business leader? According to the Harvard Business Review, he was the best performing CEO in the world, and Fortune magazine named him CEO of the decade. Those are just two among many impressive titles and honors. You do not earn those titles undeservingly. To better understand why, let us take a look at the framework table. Just his last name alone shows intent, that he was meant to have an impact on a global level. With the last name of Jobs, through following his vision, you can look at the outcome and the amount of the jobs that he actually created with just reinventing one industry alone, let alone 4. His purpose at Apple was to make things that were going to change the world. He wanted to create the greatest products. He had a vision, and then he defined his vision down to 4 distinct platforms. Then he put his A players on every platform. He had a way of empowering people to focus and create the unimaginable. By having a clear and defined goal and vision and plan, Steve Jobs was able to produce outcome that was unimaginable to many. He had a goal of quality over quantity, and he was looking at the long-term horizon. Although it was not always sunshine, Steve Jobs had a way of turning adversity into obstacles. He had some difficult challenge that had came along over the way. However, with Jobs, he always had a way to turn things around. He looked at all those obstacles and saw opportunity. As we touched on earlier, he had some challenges of his early years of adoption and bullying. And then he ran into some financial challenges which forced him to drop out of college. Yet he still chose to sit in on the courses that appealed to him. And then again, he was presented with some more financial challenges when trying to start up Apple without the capital. And again, financial challenges when Apple needed a bailout from Bill Gates to continue the innovative product and development when he was short on funds. That being said, the need for capital seemed to be a recurrent pressure along with his mistake of managing the success from Apple's first go-around. Not only were his challenges financial, but he also had challenges in regards to working with others. Steve Wozniak, for instance, which led to his greatest challenge of all, being fired from Apple, a company that he had started, and later on having to reinvent Apple again. According to a quote from Steve Jobs in his speech at the Stanford Commencement University in 2005, he said, "I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." And that's because Steve was a techno-visionary. He took a positive outlook and an open perspective of his failures, and it became a point where he felt that he did not have to worry about success, and that would allow him to open up his creativity on another level. One of Steve's greatest pressures, it was the pressure he put on himself in regards to trying to figure out what's next, or his famous one last thing. But was also pressure was not only what the next thing was, but also the ability to decide what not to do was just as important as knowing what to do. And with Steve, the power of focus allowed him to do that. From Apple's early infancy throughout its development, Jobs would understand the needs and desires of customers better than any other business leader. He would focus on a handful of core products with laser focus, and then he would care about those products with obsessive input. One key point to Jobs' success was being able to move beyond the computer. Steve Jobs only recruited A+ players, so these people who were already creative and willing and able to be innovative and world changers. When he recruited, he set his expectations toward the sky, and people knew what they were in for. He commanded the best, and when they performed, they celebrated those successes together. Now, some analysts may feel that Steve Jobs was a tyrannical and difficult leader. However, the company as a whole is structured entirely different than a traditional organization, and Jobs' style and focus and drive for perfection were keys to making Apple a success. If he had led any other way, Apple would not have been the success that it is today. A leader is defined as a person who has the ability to influence a group towards the achievement of goals. A leader has passion, vision, and creativity to make a positive change, and some of our most famous leaders have truly been world changers. To Steve Jobs, success meant that everyone would have Apple in their home. And according to our classroom poll, it shows that the majority of you all own some type of Apple product today. Through the power of focus and simplicity, we are left with Steve Jobs' legacy.